Thank you so much for staying with us this morning. Now, a good number of us are not unaware of what's happening between Nigeria and Chinese company Zhongshan Fuchen Industrial Investment Company Limited that have taken a significant turn. Now, we also know that this is not a case between China and Nigeria. This is a case between a Chinese company, Zhongshan Fuchen, and the Ogun State government. But because Ogun State, just for those of you who do not understand what the issues are, because Ogun State cannot deal outside of Nigeria without the federal government. The federal government has to kind of be some form of guarantee. And so they have all kinds of instruments called, one of them being ISDS, which is something that is supposed to protect the foreign company in any country. There are those who are having issues with the ISDS, saying, why should the ISDS always only favor the foreign company against a state? That's state in this context being a country, as opposed to the being the other way around, or even being a balance. We also understand from conversations that we've had on this station that there are some countries in the world who are already kicking against this ISDS. And that they are, as far as they are concerned, it is something that needs to be looked at again, and consequently, favoring one party against the other isn't really something that is good enough, particularly for investments. And all kinds of allegations are ongoing about that one. But the latest that we've heard about this particular case is something that is also very, very interesting. So on the one hand is a comment, a reaction of sorts. As I said earlier, we've heard from the Ogun State government's former governor of Ogun State government, Otumba Gbenga Daniel, who said, look, the best thing to do at this point is just to look at all of the angles of resolving the issue. And of course, Governor the Senator Ibikunle Amosun has also reacted and stated his own side of the case. But it was to that Professor Pat Utomi responded, and there's been some back and forth about that particular matter. This morning, Professor Pat Utomi has joined us for a conversation to understand exactly what the issues are, so that you can have a better understanding and then be able to make informed decisions. Professor Pat Utomi, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Oh, it's a great pleasure.
Well, we do realize that it's quite late where you are. Sincere apologies. He's the convener of the Big Tent, and he's also an economist joining us from Washington, D.C. Now, you have heard about this case, particularly between Ogun State and this foreign organization. Your first assessment, the moment you heard it, what was it?
Well, to be quite frank, when I first heard of the seizure, I had no clue what led to it. I just thought we had done it again. I was very unhappy. I talked about the idea of presidential fleets and why Nigeria maintains such a huge fleet, which I consider unnecessary. Many countries much more well off than Nigeria do not have presidential fleets. The British, who we learned the art of statecraft from in this modern era, typically don't have a prime minister's jet. The prime minister leases a BA aircraft to go for assignments and so on and so forth. So that was my first reaction, my first angle. Why are we bringing ourselves to this point of embarrassment? It was only the day before yesterday night that I listened to one of your broadcasts, and this whole business of why the thing was, the aircraft were seized came up. And I said, oh my God, I've been warning about this for a long time. There are many subnationals in which the governors act almost irresponsibly in the way they get into and out of foreign contracts that bring great embarrassment to Nigeria. I am a scholar of some global, if you will, disposition, and I get to talk a lot about these things around the world. And a lot of businesses will not come to Nigeria because they think Nigeria's institutions are not reliable. They think the courts can't give you justice. They think boundaries are not clear. Now, many state governments, the governor leaves, another one comes, rips off everything the governor before him has done without thought to the consequence for his state and the country in terms of how seriously the world takes them. And so when I realized that this was what was happening here, I decided to highlight my own personal experience that happened exactly about the same time as this one that led to the seizure. You see, this happens a lot to Nigerian businessmen, but because they don't have the clout of an international organization that can go to international arbitration and achieve what the Chinese firm has managed to, they just lick their wounds and keep going. And damage keeps getting done to our country. It's not just Ogun State. I make the point that I have a book that was published a few months ago, and I published a number of case studies in the book. One of the case studies is exactly of a similar thing done in another state in Nigeria that led to a foreign company, again, another South African, this is a South African one this time, leaving the country with so much loss because one governor decided to play games after he took office. Now, in this particular instance, after I then made the remarks, I was told that the former Ogun State governor then came out with broadsides against me. And I then thought, this is a second big problem in Nigeria, where people who have held public office do not have the, discipline to even speak basic, simple truths in conversations in the public domain. I told the story of my being involved in a transaction. The only time I've ever been in a transaction with Ogun State government in my life. We were trying to develop an agricultural value chain thing. First, a thing or two about my approach to doing business. I, as a member of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce about 20-something years ago, had occasion when the Convention on Business Integrity, led by Soji Apampa, and one of my old schoolmates was on the delegation, Ibisho Feku, came to make a presentation about corruption in Nigeria. And they said their approach was to get businessmen to make public declarations. I will not give, I will not take. And what they don't want to give or take is a bribe. I was shocked to my marrows. More than 60 senior businessmen in the Lagos Chamber of Commerce were at that meeting. And only 3 of us, I believe Dr. Christopher Kolade, the managing director of Cadbury, myself, and I think the late Surveyor Kukoyi, were willing to make that public declaration. Being of that disposition, I therefore recognize that doing business with government is problematic because that is the bastion of these gives and takes. So, as a matter of policy, I don't do business at all with government. The only place where you can't avoid it is when it comes to land matter, because government is the sole authority over land in Nigeria. So in this particular case, we're trying to develop a property that would be the first of a franchise to begin from one end of the value chain of this agri process, which when we create this kind of place that in quality, air-conditioned environment, women can be coming home from work at 6, 7, 8 p.m., 9 p.m. and buy fresh fruits, fresh meat, and all of that at prices lower than Okari, just because we've organized the supply side, we get the best quality at the lowest price. The idea was then to take it down the entire value chain and do a wholesale produce market where farmers from various states can aggregate their produce. We have a commodities exchange, And then we have an industrial park as part of that estate where those who process can do the processing. Somebody, a real estate person, said to us that the Ogun State Plaza, OPIC Plaza, on what was called Airport Road from Maryland to the airport, next to the Sheraton Hotel, had a place for such. And we approached OPIC and signed a build, operate and transfer deal where we lease this property for 15 years, build this facility, and after 15 years, we turn it over to OPIC. And if we're still in the property, we will now become their tenants and pay them rent. Standard thing that goes on everywhere. Most senior civil servants who own houses in Victoria Island, that's how the properties were developed. Dr. Alex Ekwueme and several other developers back in the 70s developed these properties. A couple of years later, after they've let them out to rent and made their money back, they turned them back over to these people. So it was a very simple thing. Nothing complex, nothing involving high government interference. And suddenly, there's a change of government. And we hear that the new governor, Amosun, has stopped all such constructions going on. In fact, one person in that estate who was building his own somewhere in another corner ignored the directive for everybody to stop. They came in with bulldozers to bulldoze his stuff. I said, no, let me call this gentleman and say to him, this is a simple deal. What's our problem? When I got him on the phone, he said, no, your name is not in the list of these people with these properties that we're dealing with. I said, but they said everybody should stop. He said, come to Abeokuta. And I traveled to Abeokuta. When I got to Abeokuta, he said the permanent secretary in charge was away to the UK. I think his daughter or somebody was graduating. Let him call in the other people. Called in, I think there were two ladies. He went there, Amosun, who I knew well, was, I think, working in a bank that I banked with in Lagos, and says to them, look, Prof here says that he has property affected by this order, but I don't recall seeing his name. They said, oh, no, there was no need to have his name because his own is a straightforward, simple thing. And I said, okay, it was because it's Prof, he put his name. They said, no, it's a simple, straightforward thing. Even there, Amosun, I don't know where she is, but anybody can go and verify from her. And he then says, okay, the simple thing. Everybody should be there, whether it's complex or simple or whatever. We will sort this out. The Permanent Secretary is back in 2 weeks, and this will be done. You know, this went on to a 4-year rigmarole, call, back, forth. I couldn't figure, we stopped work, obviously, at their order. We had financed the construction. I don't want to tell the long stories of how the CFO, the Lagos State government said Ogun State did not have a CFO for the property. So we had to start pursuing the CFO, the building plan. And in fact, the last time, that took forever and took a lot. And then we did all of that on behalf of OPIC. And one day, I called the governor again. I said, look, we've been talking about this now for years. What's the problem? What's wrong with that contract or anything if there is a problem? He says, why don't you come again? I went to Abeokuta. Each time I traveled with one gentleman called Vitus. And he says, oh, I have to dash to Abeokuta. I have to dash to Abuja. Let's go back to Lagos together and we can talk in the car. I said, fine. Well, he took the driver's seat of his car and invited me to sit with him and then asked his aide and my colleague.
Prof, just 1 second, because these issues were already contained in that statement that you put out, and that's, it's actually quite detailed. I just want to know, because you may also, you also highlighted the fact that Senator Amosun had responded to some of the issues raised. One of which was the fact that the House of Assembly had blacklisted you before he came into office. Is that correct?
For what? I had never ever had any transaction with Ogun State in my life before this. So how could they have blacklisted me? On what count? That's what frightens me, that public officials can make such preposterous statements. I heard that statement yesterday for the first time in my life that I was blacklisted. If I was blacklisted, for what? Like I said to you, I had never ever transacted with Ogun State in my life before this. The only time I ever did anything in Ogun State was when I was invited by the governor before him to give a talk at a retreat. It was not a contract. I was not paid. I was not. So how could they have blacklisted me? Ask him what led to that blacklisting. It's bizarre hearing such a thing. That senior public officials can just wake up and fabricate stories. On what subject? What did I have to do that will lead to a whitelisting? Not talk of blacklisting.
Well, one of that
ever had anything.
Yeah, but Kayla will come in shortly. But one of the things that was mentioned in that statement by Senator Amosun was that you claimed 200 million naira as opposed to the 100 million naira that they said that you should please take. In fact, that part of their own assessments was that everything that you were claiming was too much, much more than whatever it was that was due to you. Can you give us an understanding
of that? Know what was due to me? Were they there when I was chasing Lagos state government? Were they there when I was traveling around the country setting up supply chains? Who gives them the temerity to know what I can claim? He says, I was talking to one editor yesterday who says, let me take you there. He has spent only 30 million. You will see somewhere than 30 million. So if it is only 30 million, he says that I've spent, why did he give me 100 million? Why is he dashing away Ogun State money to this entitled fellow? He will tell you that something is fundamentally wrong in what he's saying. Cannot be correct. He has no way of determining how much I've spent when he frustrated a business enterprise. The real collateral damage to me of what he did runs into billions. So who is he to be able to assess what it is? And why did he say to me, put in this, get this 100 million and then write again to begin to pursue the next tranche? I was not the only one there.
Prof, there's quite a lot of accusations that Mr. Amosun has made. And of course, Ayo has listed two of them. Another thing that he said was that most of the cases that you're bringing up do not have any standing, and that you're just doing me too, so to speak. In fact, that was the statement, that was the sentence he used. He said, he's going on me too, I have been wronged by the Ogun State government. They said, and I'm going to use his words, that you were blacklisted due to predilection for shoddy business deals in the state. Those were the reasons that they gave, and I'm sure you want to explain what deals they may be referring to there. And then they're saying that you're in the House of Reps' black book, and that you are no different from Zongfu International Investment, FXE, basically saying,
my dear,
alluding to the fact that you may just be doing the same thing that Zongfu did at the time, which was, try to paint someone bad and then come in and, and everything that's happened afterwards.
My dear, have you been listening to me? I have just said to you that I have never, ever had anything to do with the Ogun State government before this. So what did they blacklist me for? Amosun should say that. He was the one who said that they blacklisted me. At least if they blacklisted you, it should be for something.
Yeah, that's the statement I gave you. That's the sentence I gave you. The sentence was shoddy business deals in the state.
Which business? I have never done business with them. That's the point I'm saying to you. So how could they be shoddy when I've never done anything at all with them? At all. So he should name the business that they went shoddy.
So I want to get from you going forward in your matter now. What would you want done? We've seen your statement. We've listened to Abikunle Amosun. We've listened to everyone speak on this. What do you want done now?
I don't want anything done. I'm just speaking as a patriot to get us to stop governors behaving like that. I walked away. I forgot about the deal a long time ago. I forgot whatever it was I'd lost or not lost. I moved on a long time. I was just surprised to hear that was the source of this problem with these Chinese. And then I said, look, I'm not only a citizen who cares about his country. I recognize that we are in a nation building mode. And unless we correct mistakes, and this is happening too often with state governors, he's not the only one. that unless we begin to talk about it, we will not curb it. We will not set boundaries. Because when you say, people are not willing to invest in Nigeria, but why is it so? And people say, why? Why don't they like Nigeria? It's because these things have a ricochet effect. They tell their stories to others, and others say, that Nigeria, please don't go there. As a patriot, as a citizen who would like to see these things stop and make this point, again, you have to realize that where I'm coming from is that I'm a student of institutions and economic performance. That's my fundamental area of intellectual activity. Institutions are so critical for progress in any society. Culture, institutions, fundamental for any growth. And I watch Nigeria and I see the actions of not so responsible public officials, because our institutions are weak, continue to harm the country. So when I heard this, I thought, let me make this point so that we can learn. That is why I actually wrote the case study on the Enugu one, which is in this book that I have just published on policy, power, and performance. It had nothing to do with my wanting anything. I don't want anything. They can take the money and go. I'm just saying, let our country stop putting itself in this shame place. That's all I want.
Let's talk a bit about this shame place that you just mentioned right now. And of course, I know, like you said earlier, just coming from the standpoint of someone who's a patriotic Nigerian, one of the things that we've heard the Minister of Foreign Affairs, at least the present Minister of Foreign Affairs, say, and he said this at Malabo recently, he said state governments should not be going into international contracts without the necessary people that should be involved, like the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, ministries, and all the experts in government that should help with these sorts of negotiations. My question to you, really, just as someone who's a patriot, as you said, what did you make when you heard of something like this? Is it possible that this was going on all the while when Mr. Amosun was governor, and then leaving office, there have been several levels of litigation afterwards? Who was representing Nigeria's interests in those court proceedings? Just give me your thoughts on that.
The thought is that we've not organized ourselves well as a country. Look, institutions are about boundaries, and in developing these boundaries, systems, processes are put in place. International agreements are very, very important things that we don't just walk in and out of. We should have a clearinghouse through which any international agreement is going to go, so that we know what consequences there are. But I think just as a decent person, any decent person, I mean, when we talk about states, countries, it's not different from a household. If you're a head of a household, and you are told that your senior brother or whatever went to your neighbor and took a ram, and that you have not paid for the ram. You say, it was my senior brother who took it. I don't want. He is eating the ram. That's your problem. Of course, you know that they will blacklist your family as a family that does not live up to its obligations. And so you don't do that out of pure decency and love for your country. But there are many state governors who don't even know enough or think enough. And when they are professionals like accountants, it's even more frightening. And that's why we must talk about this. The failings of Nigeria is the result of failed rational public conversation. That the marketplace of ideas then leads to shared values around which society then acts. Now, we can now start saying state governments, you can't go into contracts, and then that might be the fastest way to grow in the country. I mean, you go back to the 1960s, the country grew because subnationals were the ones creating wealth. So we might then suffer a greater harm because we say, don't let them go in there, and bureaucracy will then prevent good from coming. But if we had shared values, that a governor knows that he cannot cancel a contract that his predecessor went into without setting kind of due process, we put ourselves in a place of trouble. If he knows that, we put ourselves in a place of understanding that then leads others to trust us and go into contractual relationship with us, whether they be state or national. That's really what the point is.
I mean, going into contracts, it's brought a lot of conversations, really, because you do see a lot of people talking, especially on social media, about the fact that many governors like to go into these contracts and, like you said, to reduce the bottlenecks that will stop benefits from coming to their people. But there are people who also believe that a lot of state governors like to go into these contracts because of the kickbacks that they would get from them, and they do not want to be able to share all of that, or all of the trouble that will go into getting everyone necessary involved in getting these things done. In the case of this Ogun matter, I did mention something earlier, and I wanted you to point on that. Who has been, because there have been court proceedings. This order that was given by the French courts is not the only one. We have one from England. There's one from England as well, and there are properties also that have been seized there. So my issue is with the court proceedings that have been going on. Can any government, after Ibikunle Amosun, say that they do not know that this has been going on? Can the Tinubu administration say that they did not know that this had been happening? What are your thoughts? And if you have any knowledge on what's been happening so far, I would like to hear it.
Again, it is a part of what I've been trying to say about how we need to sit down as a people and recognize that our future is in the hands of our agents. Agents are people who go into public life on our behalf, whether they be elected governors, senators. There's a certain level of sensitivity to the common good that they must have that should affect. Why don't we have in the State Attorney General's office a management system for these things that highlight when it's going to become problematic and get the appropriate support to make sure that it comes out right? I have no involvement or understanding of what the processes were there. All I did was to point out that this is not an isolated case. That is not, even with that particular actor, a new thing. There were many of those. And that he was not the only one guilty, that several others in other states have done it as if they have no understanding of the meaning of obligation. And if we begin a process of, first of all, educating people who go into public life, I don't want to, again, go back to this history. When the APC was founded, and I found it interesting, just as I was about to come on this broadcast, my phone was ringing. A senior APC official was trying to call me. I don't know if it had to do with this broadcast. I begged them. I said, look, let us have a massive orientation program for everybody who is going to go into public office. My friend Chief Oyegun said to me, there's no money to do that. I said, you don't have to spend money. I will bring all the experts free of charge as goodwill to me. And they will sit down, the lawyers, the political scientists, the economists, give these people some massive orientation for how to act in public office. We didn't do that. I wrote about that in another book. Why not? And this is the consequence, because people go in there and think it's just a Boy Scout thing without realizing the consequence for the country of their actions in public office. I think that, again, you mentioned names of high office people. In this particular case, I complained to them before they got into high office of today. I went to them and said, this is what's going on now. And they said, we'll talk to him, but that guy is difficult. I complained to these high people in office today about this very transaction. Then I thought, okay, hey, I will lick my wounds and move on. It's happened many times. This is not the first time I'm dealing with this kind of thing in Nigeria, because our institutions are too weak. But if you want, you can give me a session sometime in the future. I'll sit down with you and talk about institutions and how they failed and the consequence, the cost for our development. And this is a classic example. I just wanted us to learn from it, to draw from it. I don't want any I've moved on. I then moved from that level of the value chain where I wanted to start to another level to begin to try and build an integrated producer. See, why am I in business? How do I go into business? First of all, my primary business is the production of knowledge. Thankfully, I've reached a level in that business where I can take care of my hygiene functions. I can pay my school fees, my children's school fees, and everything. And so I say to myself, how do we build a strong economy? Most businessmen will want something they will make, the return tomorrow. But I recognize those are not the things that build economies for good. So I said, since I have the luxury, I'm not rushing to pay school fees. My knowledge creation bit will do all of that. Let me look at long-term businesses that will be pillar ventures for the economy.
Indeed, Prof. Sorry to cut in there. To cut in there, but we do need to, create a timeline, because this is a conversation that is going to be going on for a very long time. Of course, embarrassing in many ways, but very instructive in other ways. So let's run through this timeline just on your screens right now, just so we can see how everything has happened from 2001. This whole situation with these Chinese companies. In 2001, Nigeria and China signed this bilateral investment treaty to encourage investment between both countries. That was where it all started from. By 2010, Zhongshan Fucheng Industrial Investments, through its parent company, Zhuhai Zhongfu Industrial Group, forgive us if we don't pronounce these names properly, they acquired rights to develop the Ogun Guangdong Free Trade Zone in Ogun State. Then in 2011, Zhongshan set up a local entity, Zhongfu International Investments, FZE, to manage the development of the free trade zone. The Chinese firm then carried out several works, including the development of infrastructure like roads, sewage, and power networks within that zone. Then in 2012, Ogun State appointed Zhongfu as the interim manager of that zone. That's the OGFTZ. That was in 2012. By 2013, a joint venture agreement was signed, making Zhongfu the permanent manager of the zone and giving it a majority shareholding in the project. So this was by 2013. Let's move on now to 2016. This was when the problem started. Ogun State abruptly terminated Zhongfu's appointment and took actions to expel the company from Nigeria, including the harassment of its executives and revocation of immigration papers. This was in 2016. Then the next year, in 2017, Zhongshan initiated arbitration proceedings against Nigeria, claiming breach of the bilateral investment treaty. Move now, fast forward to 2021, on March the 26th, in 2021, the tribunal, chaired by Lord Neuberger, former president of the UK Supreme Court, ruled that Nigeria breached its obligations under the China-Nigeria BIT and issuing a final award of $55.6 million, in addition to an interest of $9.4 million and costs of £2.8 million payable by Nigeria to Zhongshan. The total amount is about $70 million. So this timeline gives you an idea of where we are, at least as of now. So the Nigerian public, you know where to start asking your questions from. So you know where to start, dissecting the issues from. I'm going to throw it back to Ayo right now as we wrap up this conversation.
Your timeline. Can I add to your timeline?
Yes, please. Go ahead, Mr. Professor Pat.
In 2012, the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington here conducted a major study of China's growing economic influence in Africa. Chatham House was assigned Angola. Pat Utomi, me here, was assigned Nigeria, West Africa, and several people across the continent. After concluding these studies, we gathered in Washington to talk about this. And these were some of the fears that I expressed at the time. I had nothing to do with this company. I was just talking about the issues we needed to sort out in dealing with China. The presentation I made so resonated that about a year or two later, the Shanghai Institute of Strategic and International Studies invited me to Shanghai to speak on this same subject of China's economic growing influence in Africa. Now, if you read a book written by a lady called Irene Sun at McKinsey, Chinese woman, on China and becoming a source of Africa's economic industrial growth. I think the book is titled Africa, the World's Next Great Factory, Private Chinese Investors in Africa. You will see how she talked about trade policy and how it brought Nigeria to where Nigeria is from where it was as a growing manufacturing power in the world. And it was because of this not showing responsible behavior in trade matters that Nigeria crashed from being one of the fastest rising manufacturing economies in the world in the early 60s to where Nigeria lies prostrate today is a non-manufacturing economy. And so when I come to these issues, I'm trying to take the perspective of somebody who has deeply studied these matters and seen his country fail so badly and saying, please, let's not let our country suffer further. It's not somebody looking for anything. And then I must invent the fact that I was blacklisted for doing what? For doing that people I've never met, people I've never done anything with. How could they blacklist me?
Well, Prof, just a second. Well, I think, the issues you have raised, Prof, sincere apologies, for butting in again, it would seem. I think the issues are actually quite simple in a way. What exactly the issues are seem to be the fact, not that the states, Nigeria subnationals, cannot do business with foreign organizations, but it is in the process. Does it suggest in any way that these states are breaking any law in particular? Or it's just that they can do this business, but maybe it's the processes or procedures that are at fault? Was there any law broken, or has any state in Nigeria broken any law in doing business with other companies from other parts of the world?
Absolutely. If you sign a contract with somebody and you don't mutually agree to vary the terms of the contract and you take action unilaterally, it's breaking a local law. You not even have to go international law. That's all that is happening. We've not acted responsibly to contractual obligations, period. It's because we make government think that it has the power to do anything in Nigeria that these things happen. And this is what must change.
Is there any instruction or any authority that the federal government can exhibit or deploy to states in Nigeria in that regard to stave off such? Because as you have rightly mentioned, it's not just Ogun State that's done international business. There are so many others. That's on the one hand. On the other hand is that it's a free trade zone we're talking about here. I mean, there are those who believe that, hey, there are some laws that are supposed to be exclusive to free trade zones and not just local laws.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where we come back to the question of constitution making. Our country needs to rethink its constitution, but believe me, there are things already in place. There's a friend of mine of blessed memory, Mof Naya. He wrote a book on international contracting many, many years ago. I still remember, I think it was a white, blue-colored book. I still see it on my desk. And he points to these things. Where are those rules? You see, in days when we were a more serious society, you start work in the civil service. The first things you get, 2 books, GO and FI, General Orders, Financial Instructions. No civil servant did anything in Nigeria in 1964 without looking into those books. Today people just wake up, do anything they like, not realizing they have consequence. This is what the problem is. Our institutions have broken down in Nigeria. And all of us have an obligation, a duty to rebuild. If not, these embarrassments will be repeating themselves. Look, we're lucky that it's not worse yet. It's not worse. What is out there in terms of what we've done wrong, my goodness, if they go after us, you'll be shocked. And I can tell you, because I'm in the arena, I'm on this planet. I'm in aeroplanes every couple of hours from one part of the planet to the other. And I know the things I hear. Why should we allow this to be the burden of our children?
Well, those issues have been addressed here by you, Prof, and we cannot thank you enough. We're hoping that those in authority, would at least listen to these things and take, a cue or two from them. Thank you so much for your time this morning. Professor Pat Utomi is the convener of the Big Tent. He's also an economist. We truly appreciate your time, Prof. And I know, maybe when you return, because I know it's like in the middle of the night where you are right now, maybe when you return, we can have a more elaborate conversation on this, Prof. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.